The morning sun rose, slowly, above the industrial district on the outskirts of the city, casting long shafts of golden light through a haze of lingering smoke from the previous night's activity. And in the heart of that neighborhood stood a weather-beaten warehouse, massive and intimidating, with its rusted metal panels, soot-streaked bricks, and high-arched windows that caught the dawn glow. A place that seemed forgotten by time, yet still pulsing with hidden life inside. And it was here that the story began, with a dog, a German shepherd named Rex, 6 years old, powerful, and lean, with a thick double coat of sable and black fur that shimmered under the light, amber eyes alert with intelligence and loyalty, a gait steady and confident, ears constantly twitching to every sound. For Rex was no ordinary dog, but a trained canine who had served in countless search and rescue drills with his handler, Officer Daniel Hayes, a broad-shouldered man in his late 30s with clean-shaven features, a strong jawline, and tired blue eyes that carried the weight of both triumph and trauma. For Daniel had spent 15 years in the fire department, and in that time had seen infernos consume homes, factories, and lives. Yet he had always emerged carrying hope from the ashes, guided often by Rex's unshakable instincts and relentless courage, the bond between them forged in heat and smoke, where trust meant survival. And so on that morning, when the fire call came in about the warehouse blaze, Daniel felt the familiar surge of adrenaline mixed with dread, pulling on his heavy turnout gear, sliding the helmet over his short-cropped brown hair, adjusting the straps with muscle memory, while Rex barked sharply from the back of the fire truck, paws scraping against the metal floor as if sensing the storm ahead. The sirens screamed through the streets, scattering pedestrians and cars as the engine barreled toward the column of black smoke rising like a funeral shroud above the skyline. And as they neared the site, the acrid stench of burning chemicals and wood filled the air, stinging eyes and throats while flames licked out of broken windows of the warehouse, roaring and crackling like some beast unleashed, heat waves distorting the morning air, and firefighters leapt into action, hauling hoses, unrolling ladders, shouting commands that were half drowned by the thunder of collapsing beams inside. Daniel stepping out with Rex at his side, the leash taut but unnecessary, because Rex obeyed without hesitation, his entire being attuned to the mission of saving lives. Nose lifted as he caught the faintest traces of human scent through the choking smoke. And Daniel knelt briefly to look into his partner's eyes, whispering, "Find them, boy," before releasing him toward the yawning entrance where shadows flickered and danger loomed. Inside the warehouse, chaos reigned as fire devoured crates and old machinery, molten metal dripping from beams, sparks showering like fireworks, and Rex moved low and fast, weaving through obstacles with uncanny precision, every sense sharpened by training and instinct, ears pricked, tail stiff, while Daniel followed a few steps behind, visibility near zero as his mask filtered the scorching air, flashlight beam cutting narrow tunnels through the smoke, heart pounding with the knowledge that somewhere within this inferno, someone might still be alive. And then the bark came, sharp and urgent, Rex's voice echoing against steel walls as he clawed at a fallen pile of debris near the far corner. And Daniel rushed forward, throwing aside splintered boards until he uncovered a terrified young woman, mid-20s, with ash-smeared cheeks, tangled auburn hair, and trembling hands clutching her chest as she gasped for breath, her slender frame shaking in shock, her clothes singed, eyes wide with fear, but relief flooding them as Rex nuzzled her arm gently, Daniel helping her to her feet and guiding her toward the exit where other firefighters took her to safety. But as Daniel turned back, determined to sweep the rest of the building, a sudden explosion rocked the warehouse, blowing out windows, sending a shockwave of searing heat that knocked him against a pillar, disorienting him as Rex yelped, but stood his ground, eyes darting back to his handler as if to ask what next. And through the deafening roar, Daniel heard the faintest sound, a cry, high-pitched, fragile, unmistakably the wail of a baby carried on the smoke-filled air, and his blood ran cold because it came from deeper inside, beyond the collapsing beams and growing inferno. Yet before he could move, another officer grabbed his shoulder, shouting through the mask, "We have to pull out now. The roof's coming down." And in the split second of hesitation, Daniel looked at Rex, at the loyal dog who had never once failed him, and with a choked whisper he ordered, "Find the baby," before being dragged back by his comrades as the command to evacuate blared across the radios. As firefighters stumbled out into the harsh daylight, coughing and covered in soot, the warehouse behind them now, a towering inferno, the roof sagging ominously, Daniel's heart ached with the thought that he had sent Rex into near-certain death. His fists clenched, eyes burning not just from smoke but from anguish. Yet deep inside, he clung to the sliver of faith that his partner, his friend, his family would not give up, and that somewhere within those flames, Rex was following the faintest cry, pushing past fear and fire, driven by loyalty and love, a mission not of duty, but of the bond that tied him to humanity itself. And as Daniel fell to his knees on the asphalt, surrounded by the roar of fire engines and the shouts of his crew, he whispered to no one and everyone, "Come back, boy. Bring them back." Even as the warehouse collapsed in a storm of sparks and ash, swallowing Rex in its fiery maw, leaving the world to wait breathlessly for what would come next. The world outside the warehouse was a chaos of noise and motion. Fire hoses blasting torrents of water into the seething blaze. Reporters with cameras already arriving and shouting questions. Neighbors gathered in clusters at the perimeter, some crying, others holding their hands to their mouths in horror. Yet in the midst of it all, Daniel Hayes stood motionless, his helmet dangling from his hand, his face streaked with soot and sweat, blue eyes staring into the raging building where he had last seen Rex vanish, his heart hammering with a pain deeper than any wound he had ever sustained in the line of duty. And though his fellow firefighters called his name, tugged at his arm, tried to usher him toward the safety of the command post, he could not move, because every fiber of his being screamed that he had betrayed his partner, that he had abandoned the one creature who had never abandoned him, the German shepherd who had leapt into infernos, climbed crumbling staircases, and stood nose to nose with death beside him countless times before, now left alone in the jaws of hell. And the thought was unbearable. The fire chief, a grizzled man in his late 50s named Captain Marcus Doyle, tall and broad, with a weather-worn face, a gray mustache bristling as he barked orders, stomped toward Daniel with a fury that only thinly veiled his concern, his heavy coat streaked with ash, his deep voice roughened by years of smoke inhalation, and he shouted, "Hayes, stand down! The building's gone. There's nothing more we can do." But Daniel barely registered the words, his gaze still fixed on the fire, and Doyle softened slightly, placing a hand on his shoulder, adding in a quieter tone, "I know what that dog means to you, son. But if you go back in there now, you won't come out either." Daniel closed his eyes, fighting back a wave of despair, memories flashing through his mind. Rex, as a young pup bounding through training fields, ears too big for his head, tail wagging furiously when he caught his first scent trail. Rex leaping into a river to drag out a drowning boy. Rex curling at Daniel's feet during long nights when the loneliness of the job threatened to consume him. Each memory a reminder that this dog was not just a partner, but family, closer than blood. And to think of him suffocating in smoke, trapped in collapsing rubble, was like feeling his own lungs crushed. Suddenly, a commotion rippled through the crowd at the barricades, a young woman pushing forward despite the attempts of police to hold her back, her face pale and streaked with tears, hair disheveled, clutching at the arms of anyone who would listen, screaming, "My baby! My baby is still inside." And the words cut through the noise like a blade, silencing even the fire engines for an instant as everyone turned to her, Daniel's head snapping toward her with shock, for he realized in a crushing instant that the faint cry he had heard inside had not been his imagination, but the desperate wail of her child, still trapped somewhere in the inferno, and his chest tightened with guilt that he had allowed himself to be dragged out, that he had not fought harder to stay, that Rex was now the only one between that infant and death. The woman's name, as Daniel would soon learn, was Clara Matthews, 26 years old, slender with a frail, almost delicate frame, pale skin smudged with ash, eyes wide and glassy with terror, her long blonde hair matted and tangled, her clothes torn and blackened from where she had tried to re-enter the warehouse before being restrained by firefighters. And though grief threatened to crush her, there was a steel thread in her voice as she cried out for her child, the fierce, unbreakable love of a mother that could not be silenced by flames or fear. Captain Doyle moved swiftly to her, holding up his hands, his voice firm but steady as he tried to calm her. "Ma'am, please, we're doing everything we can, but the structure is unstable." Yet before he could finish, Clara fell to her knees, clutching at his coat, sobbing, "Please, my baby. He's only 9 months old. His name is Oliver. Please, please don't let him die in there." And her words cracked open the heart of every man and woman present, firefighters shifting uncomfortably, eyes glistening though they tried to hide it, reporters lowering their cameras for once, the crowd murmuring in sorrow and dread. And Daniel felt the weight of destiny settle on him, for it was no longer just about Rex. It was about the child, the innocent life that Rex had been sent to find. And though he stood helpless, part of him knew that if there was even the smallest chance, Rex would not fail. Inside the warehouse, Rex was navigating a world of fire and ruin, his thick coat singed at the edges, his paws scorched as he leapt across patches of molten debris, yet his focus never wavered, nose twitching as he tracked the faint but undeniable scent of human life, ears straining against the roar of collapsing beams, lungs burning with every breath, but still he pressed on, crawling under twisted steel, squeezing through gaps where even flames seemed to hesitate, until at last he found a small pocket of space behind a toppled shelving unit. And there, wrapped in a thin blanket, face red and streaked with soot, eyes squeezed shut as he cried weakly, lay the baby, Oliver, his tiny fists trembling in the hot air, his breaths shallow, moments away from silence, and Rex whined softly, nudging the child with his nose before carefully gripping the blanket in his jaws, lifting the fragile bundle with infinite care, his powerful frame now carrying not just a life, but hope itself. The warehouse groaned around him, sections of the ceiling crashing down, sparks raining like fiery hail. But Rex turned with determination, retracing his path, leaping over obstacles with the precious bundle clutched gently, shielding the baby with his own body as embers seared his fur. And though pain rippled through him, he never faltered, because instinct and love burned hotter than any fire. Outside, Clara's cries grew weaker, her strength fading as she clung to the fire chief's coat, until suddenly a shout erupted from the crowd, a firefighter pointing toward the smoke-choked entrance, screaming, "Look! Look there!" And all eyes turned as through the swirling haze, a figure emerged, not a man, but a dog, bounding forward on blackened paws, chest heaving, fur glowing with embers, eyes blazing with determination, and in his jaws he carried a bundle of soot-stained cloth, from which came the unmistakable whimper of a baby still alive. And for one breathless moment, the entire world froze before erupting into gasps, cries, and shouts of astonishment. Clara surging forward with a scream of joy, collapsing onto the asphalt as Rex placed the bundle gently at her knees, stepping back to allow her trembling hands to unwrap the blanket and reveal Oliver, coughing but breathing, eyes fluttering open as his mother sobbed and kissed his face, clutching him to her chest with a cry that echoed pure gratitude to the heavens. Daniel stumbled forward, falling to his knees beside Rex, wrapping his arms around the soot-streaked dog, tears carving clean lines down his dirty cheeks as he choked. "You did it, boy! You did it!" pressing his forehead to Rex's singed fur, while the crowd erupted into applause and cheers. Firefighters shaking their heads in awe. Reporters snapping photos furiously. Captain Doyle himself wiping his eyes as he muttered, "I'll be damned." And though Rex's body trembled with exhaustion, his tail thumped weakly against the ground, his amber eyes locking with Daniel's in silent understanding. The bond between them now deeper than ever, sealed not just by duty, but by a miracle pulled from the heart of fire. The fire was finally subdued hours later, leaving behind only the skeleton of the warehouse, a charred ruin of twisted beams and smoldering ashes that still hissed and cracked as firefighters continued to spray down hotspots, the once imposing structure now reduced to a blackened graveyard of steel and stone, and in the aftermath the scene around the perimeter had transformed into something resembling a vigil, with news vans lined up along the street, bright cameras capturing every angle, reporters shouting questions into microphones as producers urged them to be louder, neighbors huddled together murmuring about what they had just witnessed, their voices a mixture of awe and disbelief, for they had seen with their own eyes a miracle pulled from the jaws of fire, a faithful German shepherd carrying a baby alive through smoke and flame, and in that moment Rex was no longer just a K-9, but a symbol, a legend being born in real time. Clara Matthews sat on the back of an ambulance, her slender frame wrapped in a silver emergency blanket, golden hair damp with tears and smoke, her arms clutching Oliver tightly to her chest as though she would never let him go again, her blue eyes swollen from crying, but filled now with relief so profound it seemed to radiate like light. And when paramedics gently tried to check the infant's vitals, she resisted, holding him close, kissing his forehead again and again, as if by sheer will she could keep him safe forever, whispering prayers of thanks through trembling lips. Daniel Hayes sat nearby, his turnout coat discarded, his face smeared with soot, arms resting heavily on his knees, exhaustion pulling at every muscle. Yet his eyes never strayed far from Rex, who lay stretched out on a medic's blanket, sides heaving, fur singed and patchy from the heat, paws raw and blistered, but eyes still sharp and focused on his surroundings, ears twitching whenever Clara's voice cracked or Oliver whimpered, as if assuring himself that his mission had been fully completed, and though pain clearly rippled through his body, his tail tapped the ground with stubborn resilience, a silent declaration that he was still here, still standing, still loyal. Captain Marcus Doyle approached Daniel, his heavy boots crunching on debris, his expression stern but softened by the weight of the moment, and he placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, saying gruffly, "Your dog just did something no one else could, Hayes. Don't ever forget that." Then leaning down to look at Rex, his voice breaking just enough to betray his emotion. "Hell, I've seen men fall apart in less fire than that, and yet here he is, still guarding the people he saved." Daniel swallowed hard, his throat tight as he replied quietly, "He's more than a dog, Captain. He's family." And as the words left his mouth, a lump of emotion swelled in his chest, because he knew that was the truth, and he wondered how close he had come to losing that family forever inside those collapsing walls. The reporters swarmed, their questions sharp and insistent, directed at anyone in uniform who might answer, their lenses focusing again and again on Rex, lying battered yet proud, flashes lighting up his amber eyes as if they were capturing not just an image but an icon. And Daniel bristled, wanting to shield his partner from the circus. Yet he also knew the story would spread whether he wanted it to or not, and perhaps it was right. Perhaps the world needed to see that. In a time of division and despair, there still existed unyielding loyalty, bravery without hesitation, love that transcended species. Clara, overwhelmed by the crush of journalists, clutched Oliver tighter and whispered to Daniel, "How can I ever thank him? How can I ever repay what your dog has done?" And Daniel shook his head, his voice low and hoarse. "You already have, by holding your son again. That's all he wanted, to bring him back to you." And when Clara looked down at Rex, her tear-streaked face crumpled into a smile of such pure gratitude that it seemed to etch itself into everyone's memory who witnessed it. The hours stretched on, and finally the site was cleared, the fire declared extinguished, and Rex was lifted carefully by medics who insisted he be taken to the nearest veterinary hospital. For though his spirit remained unbroken, his body bore wounds that could not be ignored, burns across his legs, smoke inhalation weakening his breathing, dehydration tightening his skin, and Daniel refused to leave his side, climbing into the back of the rescue van, sitting on the cold floor, with one hand on Rex's neck, whispering encouragement as the sirens carried them through the streets, each passing light a blur of red and white against the darkening sky. At the hospital, a young veterinarian named Dr. Amelia Clark, petite and sharp-featured with kind brown eyes and dark hair tied neatly into a bun, met them with urgency, her white coat crisp against the backdrop of chaos, her voice firm yet soothing as she ordered her team to administer oxygen, apply salves to the burns, and insert an IV. Her movements precise, but her gaze occasionally flicking to Daniel, silently acknowledging the bond she saw between man and dog, and Daniel watched with clenched fists, every beep of the monitor tightening his chest, every whimper from Rex cutting through him like a blade, until finally Amelia straightened, wiping her brow with the back of her glove, and said softly, "He's stable for now, but he'll need time, care, and rest. He's a fighter. I can see it in his eyes. But even the strongest fighters need to heal." Word of Rex's heroism spread faster than the smoke had risen, sweeping across the city, then the state, then the nation, as clips of the miraculous rescue replayed endlessly on television, on phones, on social media feeds flooded with captions like "Hero Dog Saves Baby" and "Guardian Angel in Fur." And soon, the hospital was surrounded by flowers, letters, and gifts left by strangers who wanted to express their gratitude. School children sending drawings of Rex with a baby in his jaws, veterans saluting as they passed by, families kneeling to whisper prayers for his recovery. And though Daniel was unused to such attention, he could not deny the swell of pride and humility he felt, knowing that Rex's actions had touched hearts far beyond the reach of the fire's smoke. Yet amidst the celebration there was also unease, for Daniel knew that behind the miracle lay unanswered questions. How had a baby been left behind in a warehouse at all? What had started the fire in the first place? And why did Rex, of all creatures, have to bear the burden of uncovering the truth with his body scarred by flames? And those questions simmered in his mind as he sat by Rex's bedside night after night, stroking his fur, whispering, "Rest, boy. We're not done yet. There's more we have to find out." Because deep down he sensed that the fire was no accident, that this story was not yet over, that Rex's rescue was only the beginning of something larger, darker, and perhaps more dangerous than anyone had yet imagined. Night settled heavily over the city, but inside the veterinary hospital the lights remained bright and sterile, the rhythmic beeping of monitors filling the otherwise hushed corridors where exhausted staff moved like shadows. And in one quiet room, Daniel Hayes sat slumped in a chair beside Rex's bed, his body aching from the day's battles, his turnout gear long since discarded for a simple t-shirt and jeans, soot still clinging stubbornly to his skin, his eyes bloodshot but fixed unwaveringly on the German shepherd lying on a padded table, IV tubes taped to his foreleg, chest rising and falling steadily now under the soft hiss of oxygen, and though his fur was patchy from burns and his paws wrapped in gauze, there was still a dignity to him, a strength that radiated even in sleep, as though he understood the world was watching, and he had to remain their pillar of hope. Daniel rubbed a hand over his stubbled jaw, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on him. But every time his eyelids began to close, he remembered the moment he had seen Rex stagger from the flames, carrying Oliver, and the raw swell of emotion jolted him awake again, unwilling to miss a second at his partner's side, because loyalty demanded it, because he owed his life and more to the dog lying before him. As the hours dragged on, he wasn't alone for long. The door opened quietly, and Clara Matthews stepped in, still wearing the same emergency blanket draped over her shoulders like a fragile shield, her blonde hair brushed, but still smelling faintly of smoke, her slender frame trembling slightly as she carried Oliver, now fast asleep in her arms, his small chest rising and falling peacefully as though he hadn't spent the day suspended between life and death. And Clara's blue eyes glistened with fresh tears as she approached the bed, looking down at Rex with a reverence usually reserved for saints, whispering, "I had to see him again. I had to thank him." Her voice trembling as she adjusted Oliver gently, pressing her lips to the baby's forehead before lowering her gaze to Daniel. Daniel rose, his tired figure towering over her, but softened by empathy, and he gave a faint nod, gesturing toward the chair beside him, and Clara sat carefully, never letting go of her child, her eyes never leaving the dog who had given everything to return her son. "I don't know how to ever repay this," she murmured, voice cracking. "He went through fire for my baby. No one would have blamed him if he hadn't made it out. But he did. He saved Oliver when I couldn't. And I'll never forget it." Daniel swallowed hard, his throat tight with unspoken emotions, and finally managed to reply, "Rex doesn't care about repayment. That's not why he does what he does. He only knows loyalty. He only knows love. That's enough for him." The room was quiet for a long moment, filled only by the baby's soft breathing and the dog's steady pulse, until Clara reached out with a trembling hand and touched Rex's paw lightly through the bandage, whispering, "Then I'll love him too, for as long as I live." Days passed, and Rex's recovery became the city's obsession. News stations camped outside the hospital, their anchors speaking in solemn tones about the bravery of a K-9 who had risked everything, while social media exploded with hashtags like #HeroRex and #GuardianDog. Videos of his emergence from the fire viewed millions of times, strangers from across the world sending messages of hope, prayers, and donations to cover his medical expenses. And though Daniel disliked the intrusion, he understood its importance because every story reminded people that heroism still existed, that miracles were still possible in a world often weighed down by tragedy. Captain Doyle visited frequently, standing stiffly at the foot of the bed, his mustache bristling as he cleared his throat awkwardly, muttering things like, "Hell of a dog you've got, Hayes," though his moist eyes betrayed deeper feelings he refused to articulate. And sometimes he brought his granddaughter, a shy little girl with freckles and a red ribbon in her hair, who would peek nervously at Rex, before giggling when his tail wagged faintly at her presence. Daniel knew then that Rex wasn't just his dog anymore. He belonged to everyone who had been touched by his courage. Yet beneath the admiration, questions began to surface. Fire investigators combed through the ruins of the warehouse, their flashlights sweeping over charred remains, their voices hushed as they debated causes. And when Daniel overheard a conversation between two of them in the hallway, his blood ran cold. "The accelerant traces are clear," one whispered. "This wasn't just some accident with old wiring. Someone wanted that building gone." The other nodded grimly. "And leaving a child inside. That's not just arson. That's something darker." Daniel's fists clenched, his jaw tightening because suddenly the pieces began to connect. Clara's desperate cries, the baby left in a place that should have been empty, the unnatural speed of the flames, the explosion that had rocked the warehouse. It was all too deliberate, too sinister, and though he wanted to believe Oliver's presence had been a tragic mistake, a mother's oversight, deep down he feared it was something more, something intentional. When he confronted Clara gently about how Oliver had ended up in the warehouse, her eyes filled with shame and confusion, and she confessed in a trembling voice that she had gone there to meet someone she trusted, someone who had promised to help her with money when she was at her lowest. But instead, she had been trapped when the fire broke out, and Oliver had been taken from her arms in the chaos, left behind when she was forced out by flames and strangers. She refused to name the man, too afraid, too broken, and Daniel realized then that this was not just a story about a heroic dog, but about a crime still unfolding, one that Rex had inadvertently exposed by refusing to let the baby perish. Rex, though weakened, seemed to sense the shift. When Daniel whispered about the fire not being an accident, about people still in danger, Rex's amber eyes glimmered with the same determination they always held before a mission, as if promising he would not rest till the truth was unearthed. And Daniel, though torn between the desire to let his partner heal and the duty gnawing at him to pursue justice, knew that they would soon be drawn back into the heart of the storm, for neither man nor dog could turn away from unfinished battles. Clara, too, found strength in her gratitude, vowing to testify if needed, to reveal the truth despite her fear, because she could not allow her son's survival to be meaningless, could not allow Rex's suffering to be in vain. And so, as dawn broke 1 week after the fire, with the hospital surrounded still by flowers and well-wishers, Daniel stood beside Rex's bed, resting a hand on his head, whispering, "We're not done, boy. We saved a life, but now we have to find out why it was put in danger in the first place." Rex's ears twitched, his tail thumping weakly, and in that simple gesture was a vow, a shared promise between partners who had walked through fire and would walk through shadows again. For loyalty does not end with rescue. It continues until justice is found. The investigation into the warehouse fire intensified over the following weeks, drawing in not only local authorities, but also state officials, as suspicions of arson hardened into certainty. And through it all, Daniel Hayes remained at the center, both as a firefighter who had witnessed the blaze and as the handler of the dog whose miraculous rescue had turned public attention into relentless scrutiny. Yet despite the pressure, he refused to leave Rex's side, spending every possible moment aiding his recovery, massaging his bandaged paws, brushing the soot from his fur, even when the dog winced, whispering encouragement into his ear, as if his words alone could speed healing. And Rex, true to his nature, responded with unwavering resilience, forcing himself to walk again on blistered pads, pushing his nose into Daniel's hand whenever his strength flagged, as though reminding his partner that he was still here, still loyal, still ready for whatever lay ahead. The hospital became a second home to them both, the sterile smell of antiseptic mixing with the constant murmur of voices. But as Rex grew stronger, Daniel's thoughts grew darker, replaying Clara's hesitant confession about the man who had lured her to the warehouse, the unnatural spread of the flames, and the fact that Oliver had been left behind deliberately. And though he tried to quiet his suspicions, every instinct screamed that this was not just about property destruction, but about something far more sinister, something that someone was desperate to bury in ashes. Captain Marcus Doyle called Daniel into his office one evening, the old man's face carved deeper by worry lines than usual, his mustache twitching as he chewed the end of a cigar. He never lit anymore, his eyes fixed on a stack of reports spread across his desk. "Hayes," he said gravely, motioning for Daniel to sit. "I've seen a lot of fires in my time, but this one doesn't sit right. Accelerants were found in multiple locations, timed devices maybe, and yet no one is coming forward. The owners of that warehouse are playing dumb. Insurance companies already circling like vultures, but there's something rotten here. And then there's that woman, Clara, saying she was lured there. Someone wanted her trapped. Someone wanted that child trapped." Daniel's jaw clenched, his blue eyes dark with fury, and he leaned forward, his voice low. "We can't let them get away with it, Captain." Rex risked his life to save Oliver. If this was deliberate, then it means they tried to murder a baby. That's not just arson. That's evil, Doyle. Sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know, son. I've already contacted detectives. They'll handle the official side. But off the record, keep your eyes open. Sometimes the truth doesn't come out in reports. It comes out in the things we see when no one else is looking." It wasn't long before Clara returned, this time to the firehouse itself, clutching Oliver close, as she stood nervously before the crew, her blonde hair tied back neatly now, her slender frame covered in a modest dress that still hung a bit loose on her, as if hardship had stripped her of weight, her eyes darting nervously, but her voice steady as she said, "I can't stay silent anymore. The man who told me to meet him at the warehouse, his name is Victor Lang. He's a businessman, at least that's what he calls himself. But I know now he's into things I shouldn't have trusted. He said he would help me with money for Oliver's care. Instead, he left us to die." Daniel's fists tightened at his sides because he knew of Victor Lang, a tall, slick man in his 40s with slicked-back black hair, olive skin, and sharp green eyes that never seemed to reflect sincerity. A man who moved in the city's elite circles, smiling at Gallus, while rumors swirled about shady deals and backroom bribes. A man Daniel had once seen shaking hands with officials he didn't trust. Clara's voice trembled as she continued, "I think the fire was meant to erase something hidden in that warehouse. Documents, maybe. Evidence. But I was just a pawn, a distraction, and Oliver, my sweet baby, was left behind. Because to them, life means nothing compared to covering their secrets." The firehouse fell silent, every firefighter listening with rapt attention, anger hardening their faces. And Rex, lying on his blanket nearby, lifted his head, ears pricked, amber eyes fixed on Clara, as though he understood every word, a low growl rumbling in his chest at the name Victor Lang. Daniel knelt beside him, stroking his fur, whispering, "Easy, boy. We'll get him." And in that moment, Daniel knew the mission had shifted. This was no longer just about surviving fires. It was about pursuing justice, about protecting those who had no defense against the powerful. With Captain Doyle's cautious blessing, Daniel began working with Detective Sarah Morales, a sharp, determined woman in her early 30s, medium height, with a lean, athletic build, olive skin, long dark hair tied back in a practical braid, her piercing brown eyes full of intensity, her suit always slightly rumpled from long hours in the field, and a demeanor that balanced toughness with compassion. She listened intently as Daniel described Rex's role in the rescue, as Clara detailed Victor's manipulation, and she nodded slowly, saying, "If Lang's behind this, we'll need proof." He's slippery, always covering his tracks. But if he tried to kill a child, then he's crossed a line. Even his money can't protect him from. Days turned into tense nights as Daniel and Rex began assisting Sarah unofficially, retracing steps, revisiting the ruins of the warehouse, Rex's keen nose still finding traces others missed, scorched metal carrying chemical residues, fragments of paper buried under rubble that hinted at financial records, the faint scent trail of someone who had lingered in the shadows that night before the blaze consumed everything. Each discovery pulled them deeper into a dangerous web, and though Rex's body still bore the marks of fire, his spirit burned hotter than ever, his every bark and growl urging Daniel forward. Clara, meanwhile, remained in hiding under police protection, her gratitude tempered by fear, clutching Oliver day and night, whispering prayers that justice would prevail, her fragile frame carrying the weight of both motherhood and trauma. And Daniel promised her every time they spoke, "We'll see this through. For you. For Oliver. For Rex." One night, as Daniel walked Rex through the quiet streets near his apartment, the dog suddenly stiffened, ears twitching, body rigid as his nose lifted to the wind, and before Daniel could react, a black SUV rolled slowly past, its tinted windows reflecting streetlights like dark mirrors. And though it didn't stop, the message was clear. They were being watched. Daniel's gut tightened, but he laid a steadying hand on Rex's back, whispering, "Not yet, boy. Our time will come." Though inside, he knew the battle had already begun, and it would not end without fire of a different kind. The storm that had been building for weeks finally broke on a night heavy with rain, thunder rolling across the skyline like the prelude to judgment. And in the heart of that storm, Daniel Hayes stood beside his loyal partner, Rex and Detective Sarah Morales, as they prepared to face the man whose greed and malice had nearly cost a child his life, the elusive Victor Lang. For days, Sarah had pieced together the fragments uncovered in the ruins of the warehouse, connecting dots across financial records, offshore accounts, and shell companies, until a pattern emerged. The warehouse had been storing documents, tying Lang to illegal arms shipments, evidence damning enough to end his empire if exposed, and the fire had been his desperate attempt to erase the trail. Clara Matthews had been lured as an unwitting pawn, her baby left behind as collateral damage in a crime too monstrous to excuse. And though Lang had long evaded justice with bribes and influence, now he had made a mistake, too grave to conceal. Tonight was the night they would catch him in the act, as Sarah had traced his next meeting to a secluded dockyard on the river, where crates were being loaded under cover of darkness despite the pounding rain. A final attempt to move what remained of his operations before the walls closed in. The dockyard stretched wide and desolate, cranes looming like skeletal giants against the stormy sky, floodlights cutting harsh beams through the rain as men in dark coats moved swiftly, their voices muffled by the storm. Black SUVs parked in neat lines along the pier. Daniel crouched behind a stack of containers with Rex at his side, the dog's fur slicked down by rain, but his amber eyes gleaming with focus, his body tense as a bowstring, every muscle ready to spring, and beside them, Sarah adjusted the holster at her hip, her dark braid plastered to her neck, her jaw set with determination. She leaned close, shouting over the storm, "Backup's 10 minutes out. If we wait, Lang could be gone. We move now. We get him." Daniel nodded grimly, his hand resting on Rex's harness, whispering into the dog's ear, "Stay with me, boy." We finished this together, and Rex responded with a low bark, tail stiff, as if to say he understood. They moved like shadows, slipping from cover to cover, the rain masking their steps as they drew closer to the heart of the operation, until at last they saw him. Victor Lang, tall tall and imposing in a tailored black coat that gleamed with rain, his slicked back hair glistening under the floodlights, his green eyes sharp as he barked orders to the men hauling crates, his lips curled in a smirk of confidence, as though the storm itself bent to his will. But that confidence faltered when a sudden bark split the night, loud and commanding, echoing off steel and water, and every head snapped toward the sound as Rex bounded forward, muscles surging with power, his figure a streak of fury in the rain. Daniel and Sarah followed close, behind, weapons raised, voices shouting, "Police! Drop your weapons!" The dockyard erupted into chaos as Lang's men scrambled, some reaching for guns, others fleeing toward the SUVs. But Rex lunged with precision, knocking a weapon from a thug's hand, teeth bared in a snarl that froze another in place, while Daniel tackled a second man, disarming him with practiced strength, Sarah's voice cutting sharp commands as she fired a warning shot into the air, the storm itself seeming to roar with her authority. Lang tried to retreat, shouting curses as he moved toward his SUV, but Rex was faster, darting through the rain to block his path, his growl deep and unrelenting, amber eyes locking on the man who had nearly destroyed an innocent life. Lang sneered, "Get that mutt away from me." But his voice trembled, betraying fear as he reached inside his coat for a pistol, only to freeze when Daniel appeared behind Rex, weapon trained steadily on him, his blue eyes burning with fury, his voice low and deadly calm. "Go ahead, Lang. Make my dog's day." For a moment the storm held its breath, the rain pounding, the world suspended between life and death, until Lang's shoulders slumped, the gun clattering to the wet ground as Sarah moved swiftly to cuff him, reading his rights with a voice as cold as steel. The men still standing surrendered quickly after that, realizing there was no loyalty strong enough to outweigh the loyalty of a dog and his partner who had walked through fire together. When the backup units finally arrived, the scene was already under control. Victor Lang shoved into the back of a squad car, his empire crumbling as evidence was seized. His reign of fear finally ended. Daniel knelt beside Rex, pulling him close, rain dripping down his face as he whispered, "We did it, boy. It's over." And Rex licked his cheek, tail wagging weakly, his body trembling not from fear, but from the release of tension, the knowledge that his mission was complete. Sarah, soaked to the bone but grinning with triumph, clapped Daniel on the shoulder and said, "You and that dog, you're something else. The city owes you both more than it can ever repay." Daniel shook his head, glancing at Rex with a soft smile. He doesn't want repayment, just a place to belong. In the days that followed, the story exploded across every channel. Headlines declaring, "Hero Dog, who saved baby, helps bring down criminal kingpin." News anchors praising Rex as both savior and symbol. Crowds gathering outside the firehouse to cheer whenever Daniel and Rex appeared. Children holding up handmade signs with drawings of German shepherds. Families bringing treats and toys. Veterans saluting as though to a fellow soldier. Clara Matthews, her strength slowly returning, stood at a press conference with Oliver in her arms, her voice steady as she said, "Because of this dog, my son is alive. Because of him, the man who tried to take everything from us has been stopped. He is not just a hero to me, he is a hero to us all." Her words moved the crowd to tears, and when Daniel brought Rex onto the stage, the roar of applause shook the very ground, cameras flashing as the dog stood proudly, tail wagging, eyes bright despite his scars. The mayor presented Rex with a Medal of Valor, a golden emblem that gleamed against his dark fur, and Daniel with a commendation for bravery. But the true reward was not in the honors or applause. It was in the quiet moments after, when Daniel sat alone on the firehouse steps with Rex beside him, the city lights twinkling in the distance, the night calm at last. He scratched behind Rex's ears, whispering, "You're more than a partner, more than a hero. You're my brother." And Rex leaned into him, eyes half closed, a contented sigh rumbling through his chest, as if to say the feeling was mutual. Clara and Oliver often visited, the baby giggling whenever Rex nudged him gently. Clara's gratitude softening into friendship, her once fragile frame filling again with health as she rebuilt her life. And Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace, the kind that comes from knowing you've made a difference, that you've stood against darkness and brought back the light. And so the story of Rex spread, not just as a tale of survival, but as a lesson in courage, loyalty, and love. A reminder that sometimes heroes have 4 legs and fur, that sometimes salvation comes not from power or wealth, but from the simple, unyielding devotion of a faithful heart. People would speak of that night for years to come, of the warehouse blaze, of the baby carried alive through the flames, of the downfall of a man who thought himself untouchable. And always at the center of the story would be the image of a German shepherd, scarred but unbroken, eyes glowing with the fire of loyalty, standing beside his human, proving to the world that in the darkest of nights, love burns brightest.